Mr. William Fleischer. Thank you. You'll hear more from these.
All right, we're going to get back to this breaking news right now. The identity of the boy in the box.
Recent and past trauma. In his very short life, it was apparent that this child experienced horrors that no one should ever be subjected to. Despite repeated pleas for help from the public and immense public interest in the story, no one ever came forward to claim the child. Throughout the decades, countless police officers and detectives worked this case, as did DNA analysts, geneticists, and doctors. For 65 years, the story of who would come to be known as America's unknown child has haunted this community, the Philadelphia Police Department, our nation, and the world. When people think about the boy in the box, a profound sadness is felt, not just because a child was murdered, but because his entire identity and his rightful claim to own his existence was taken away. And despite not knowing his name for 65 years, this child's tragic story was always remembered by the community, the Philadelphia Police Department, and our partners. Sadly, many that worked on his case throughout the decades and put in countless hours of work into identifying him have passed on. But as you can see, his story was never forgotten. When law enforcement cannot prevent a crime from occurring, our mission is to make sure that we investigate all leads and gather evidence that will give victims a voice. The science and technology that was instrumental in the identification of this child, one of our oldest unsolved homicides, gives me hope that we can continue to identify unknown victims of crime and that no one will ever again have to wait this long for their name and the story of their life to be told. There are so many that I wish to thank, and it would be impossible to name them all. However, I'd like to personally recognize some of our partners that are here speaking today. From the Medical Examiner's Office, Chief Medical Examiner Dr. Constance D'Angelo, thank you. From Identifinders International, genealogist Dr. Colleen Fitzpatrick, thank you. And representing the VDOC Society, Mr. William Fleischer, thank you. You'll hear more from these individuals shortly, but suffice it to say, without their tireless work on this case, today's announcement would not have been possible. Next from PPD, I'd like to thank Director Michael Garvey, the head of our Forensic Sciences Bureau, as well as Mr. Ryan Gallagher, our Forensic Laboratory Manager, who will also be speaking today. And of course, our tireless homicide detectives, who always put everything that they had into seeking justice for victims. To our current lead detective on this case, Detective Bob Hesser, and his partner, recently retired Detective Gregory Santamala, who several years ago became the steward of this investigation. Thank you. And lastly, I want to acknowledge, I'm skipping one, I'm sorry. I'd like to also recognize the most recent prior lead on this case, retired Sergeant Bob Kallmeyer, who in his retirement now shares his talents as a member of the VDOC Society. So thank you. And now lastly, I want to acknowledge and thank PPD Detectives Tom Augustine and Greg Rodden. Throughout the 1990s, both of these detectives worked extensively on this case and were well known for their unending dedication in seeking justice for the victim. Unfortunately, Detective Rodden passed away in early 2020, and Detective Augustine passed away just 6 weeks ago. While we wish they were still here with us today, we know that their passion and dedication lives on with their colleagues. While I'm thankful for the relentless work of everyone involved in this case, this announcement only closes one chapter in this little boy's story while opening up a new one. This is still an active homicide investigation, and we still need the public's help in filling in this child's life story. I will now turn this over to Captain Jason Smith, our commanding officer of our homicide unit, who will provide details into the investigation. Without the hard work, dedication, and passion and the doggedness of the many, we would not be here today to give America's formerly unknown child, Joseph Augustus Zarelli, a voice.
Oh, wow.
Captain.
They found him. They found his identity. Zarelli.
Thank you, Commissioner. Good morning, everyone. Before I provide you with an overview of this investigation, I would like to echo the sentiments of the Commissioner by thanking all those individuals and entities who participated.
This is
and really put
heartbreaking.
their hearts into this investigation. On February 26, 1957, at 10:40 a.m., the remains of a white male estimated to be 4 to 6 years of age were located in a wooded area with dense underbrush along Susquehanna Road between Varee and Pine Roads in the city and county of Philadelphia. The child had been severely beaten. He was unclothed, had been wrapped in a multicolored blanket, and placed inside of a cardboard box. The child had brown hair that was crudely cut close to the scalp and blue eyes. Multiple bruises were visible on the child's body. An autopsy revealed that the child has sustained multiple abrasions, contusions, a subdural hemorrhage, and pleural effusions. The autopsy confirmed that the child was between 4 and 6 years of age. The child was subsequently buried in plot number 191 at a potter's field located at 12898 Dunks Ferry Road in the city of Philadelphia. The investigation was originally assigned to Detectives Powell and Repsch in 1957 and reassigned to Detective Carruthers in May of 1960. Hundreds of tips and leads were received both locally and nationally from around the country. These tips were diligently followed up on by investigators. None, however, would lead them to the positive identification of the child. On October 30th, 1998, a court order was obtained to have the child's remains exhumed. A post-mortem examination was performed, and the child was subsequently reinterred at Ivy Hill Cemetery, located in the Cedar Brook section of Philadelphia. Portions of the remains were retained for future testing. DNA testing was performed at that time, but yielded no new leads in the investigation. For over 6 decades, the case was continuously investigated by members of the homicide unit who worked in concert with the Medical Examiner's Office, the Forensic Science Bureau, the VDOC Society, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, and many other local, state, and federal agencies. This investigation had come to be referred to as the boy in the box, and the child who was the subject of this investigation was referred to as America's unknown child. Homicide investigators, along with members of the Medical Examiner's Office, conducted a review and assessment of investigations involving unidentified victims to determine which of those may benefit from the application of modern forensic techniques. It was determined that the case of the unknown child, OME number 57-0863, would benefit from the application of such modern forensic techniques.
Get out. Get
A
out.
portion of the remains that were in the possession of the Philadelphia Medical Examiner's Office were determined to be insufficient in order to obtain the required DNA to apply these modern techniques. In homicide cases such as this, extreme difficulty lies in the fact that rarely can they be resolved and the offender ultimately brought to justice until the victim is first identified. With that in mind, on April 24th of 2019, an additional court order was obtained to have the child's remains exhumed once again. Forensic anthropologist Dr. Washburn examined the remains and was able to obtain the required amount of DNA to apply modern forensic techniques. The child was reinterred and portions of the remains were retained for future testing. Contemporary forensic applications and techniques, including genealogical DNA testing and inquiries, were made with the assistance of genetic genealogists. The results of the DNA testing were uploaded to DNA databases, and the results were interpreted by the genealogists involved in this investigation. Based on the interpretation of the results by the genealogists, detectives were able to locate and make contact with possible relatives of the child's family
Oh my
on the
God.
maternal side.
Oh my God.
Through further investigation and additional testing, the genealogists involved in this investigation were able to establish the identity of the birth mother of the
Oh my
unidentified
God.
child. A court order signed by a court of common pleas judge to obtain the birth records, death records, and adoption records for all children born to the established birth mother between
on.
the years 1944 to 1956 from the Pennsylvania Department of Health, Bureau of Health Statistics and Registries, Division of Vital Records. There were 3 responsive results based on this order. 2 of the results were birth certificates for children born to the established birth mother during that time frame who were previously known to investigators, one of whom provided DNA and was matched previously by the genealogist. The 3rd result was a birth certificate for a male child born to the established birth mother in 1953, which could be consistent with the approximated age of the unidentified child. The birth father was listed on the birth certificate for the male child born in 1953. Based on research by detectives and the genealogists, a male was discovered who could possibly be the birth father of the unidentified child. Detectives were able to locate and make contact with possible relatives of the child's family on the paternal side. Through additional testing, the genealogists were able to establish the birth father of the unidentified child.
Oh, Jesus.
A request was sent to the Social Security Administration Office of Inspector General to determine if a Social Security number had ever been issued in the name of the child. The response from the Social Security Administration was that there had not been. Homicide investigators, Detective Bob Hesser and Detective Greg Santamala, as well as Forensics Laboratory Manager Ryan Gallagher, met with Dr. Albert Chu of the Medical Examiner's Office. Dr. Chu was apprised of the aforementioned facts. Dr. Chu also consulted with the genetic genealogists involved in this investigation. Dr. Chu indicated that based on the facts presented and the conclusions of the genetic genealogists, the death certificate for the unknown child, OME number 57-0863, would be amended to reflect the child's birth name, Joseph Augustus Zarelli.
Oh,
Joseph's
God.
date of birth is January 13th, 1953. Before I turn things over to our Chief Medical Examiner for the City of Philadelphia, Dr. Constance D'Angelo, I would like to address 3 questions which I believe most of you would like an answer to. The first is going to be, who are the child's parents and what are their names? At this point in time, we are not going to be releasing that information. Joseph has a number of siblings on both the mother and father's side who are living, and it is out of respect for them that their parents' information remain confidential.
That's just a matter of time.
The second question is obviously going to be, do we know who was responsible for Joseph's death? The answer at this time is unfortunately no. We have our suspicions as to who may be responsible, but it would be irresponsible of me to share these suspicions as this remains an active and ongoing criminal investigation.
Oh my God.
The third question, I believe, is going to be, are you currently working on any additional unidentified persons cases? The answer to that question is going to be yes, we absolutely are. There is an ongoing effort to apply the technology and techniques used in this investigation to other unknown human remains cases. These investigations involve victims of homicide, cases deemed to be suspicious in nature, as well as accidental or from natural causes.
Please, he was
A team of
brutally
investigators from the
murdered.
Homicide Unit's Cold Case Squad, our Special Victims Unit, Long-Term Missing Persons Squad, Forensic Science Bureau, the Office of the Medical Examiner, and the District Attorney's Office meet on a weekly basis to review and identify cases that would benefit from the application of these techniques to further their respective investigations. There are currently more than
So
a
that
dozen
boy's
cases
parents would be in their
progress right now.
90s.
And as leads are developed, they're pursued by investigators.
They're still
and worked on
alive.
by other members from the group.
Wow. Just wow.